Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the New Earth Leadership Summit, inspiring spiritual entrepreneurs like you to step into their personal power so that we can become the leaders of New Earth. And today I have with me Makie Bloomer. All right, Makie is an indie music artist, a visual artist, and a designer. And she is a multipreneur. So she is constantly moving back and forth between these spheres. But not only that, you have recently taken on your father's business as well. So he had founded a national magazine called Performance Horse. And so I'd love to talk about that. We're going to talk about that in the interview, but also you have a lifestyle brand called Late Bloomer Crew, which I think is, first of all, what a great name. Like, what a great way to utilize your beautiful last name. And I love the inspiration behind it because she believes it's never too late to bloom. Isn't that beautiful? And that we all have dreams to explore no matter our age or circumstance. So Makie, you've got a lot going on, and you are what I would definitely call a multipreneur. So I want to hear the story about how all of this developed for you.
Ooh, it's so interesting. And I know we were just chatting before we hopped on here about my next song that's coming out called Detours, which is probably the best way I can describe on how all of this multipreneurship works together. Because sometimes when we feel that our life is being taken on a detour, we're actually being led to our destiny. And we can't always see the bigger picture. God sees that, our higher self sees that, the universe sees it. We don't always see it. Sometimes we have this very narrow idea of what our purpose is and what we want to work on. But in reality, our capabilities are so much bigger than we can comprehend. And sometimes these detours, like, for instance, I've been writing and recording music for several years. I've also been a graphic designer, an interior designer, and a writer and all of this. And recently my father passed away very suddenly, and which has been very hard, but also a beautiful thing. And you and I had an opportunity to chat about his spiritual transformation and some of the things I was able to see. And and so, yes, I've taken on his business, which is something that was not on my trajectory whatsoever. But it's one of those detours that is oddly working in partnership with these other things that I have already started, my music, my lifestyle brand. It's a platform to reach more people with a good message. And that's what we're here to do. And I love that you invited me to talk about creating this new earth and being aware and in tune and looking inward and upward rather than to the TV or social media to tell us what to do and what to think.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you hit on such a great point there because, when I communicate with my own spirit team and get in touch with source, I am constantly reminded that the deeper we go into these higher vibrations, the more confusing the outer world will be if you're being led by the outer world. So it's like the messages and the things happening around us are, and we're already experiencing it. We're already seeing miscommunication, misdirection, all these different layers happening. And so they said, and it's by design. So it's not something that is happening to us, it's happening for us. And the reason that it's happening for us is to exactly get you to go inward and upward, which is how you find discernment. So I love that you bring that out because that is absolutely how we're going to find our guidance system as we move deeper and deeper into these really big vibrational shifts that we're going through. And I love that the song that you're working on or that's about to come out, Detours, speaks to that as well, because I mean, the fun story about Makie and I is that we actually met each other years ago before I even had kids. We met, like we were working on a series of television commercials together. So we also share that as a background, that we also have a background in acting. And so we've managed to stay connected through all that time. And it's so fun because like, you never know who you're going to meet along your path and how your paths are going to like crisscross in the future. I mean, it's just one of those really beautiful moments, and to meet another person who is multi-passionate, but there's so many ways that you're expressing your energy, and all of them are being called out by source, by God. They're calling, like he's calling this out of you. And so it's so interesting because being in that, I mean, some people have a very direct, clear path. They're like, this is my mission. This is how I'm here. And yet I do meet a lot of people who have similar like vibrational energy like us, who are holding a lot. It's like we're like in a little circus juggling all these balls constantly, and we don't want to drop a single one because they all feel relevant to the work. So I'm going to ask you a question. I'm not sure if anyone's ever asked you this before, but the way I've made sense of my own journey is that I have to house it all in, I have to put it all in a house. So I call my house the house of intuition. So everything I do, even the acting, even the art, the jewelry, the teaching, the coaching, it's all in the house of intuition. So if your work resided in a house, what would the name of your house be?
Oh gosh, I guess I'd call it my church. I don't know. And I do go to church, and but for me, I grew up on a farm, and I'm the happiest in nature. And I always joke that nature is my church. But yeah, for me, all of these things, they have a higher purpose, and it's not about me. I could say maybe in my early 20s, or maybe even the time that you and I met and we were acting on that series, maybe I wasn't quite to the point yet where it wasn't all about me, right? Becoming a mother helps with that also, but just getting to this point where I'm just at a point where I just want to be a vessel. I want to be a mouthpiece for whatever truth needs to come into the world, and whatever light and goodness. And I am here for that, So I like that, your house of intuition.
So would that make it like the house of truth? Is that
yeah.
I love that. I mean, and of course, just for everyone listening, your house, you decide that, right? It's just, this is how everything I see that you're doing flows together. It's like, it always brings you back to something. It's always, even though it looks like music on the surface, it's bringing you back to something deeper, like the truth. And even though it looks like you're working as an editor through your dad's, his magazine, it's always leading you back to something deeper. So I don't know. Maybe I gave you something to ponder, but that's just something that
you hit the nail on the head, because actually a few months prior to my dad passing, I was gifted a session with a life coach, and she kind of wanted to get me to a sentence similar to that. And it did also have truth in it. So
interesting. Okay.
Really intuitive.
Yeah. I love that. Okay. Well, that's that is a quite high vibrational house to have too. I mean, the truth is the ultimate, right? And it can't be hidden.
It can't be hidden, and it's there for all of us to find if we want it.
Absolutely.
And
absolutely.
There's a lot of confusion happening in the world. But the truth is there if we want to find it.
Absolutely. And it's interesting because we also have to be ready for it too. We have to be ready to receive it. And it's been a really interesting time period where there's this, I'm noticing that this time period really does show spiritual maturity. So we're sort of seeing where we're at on the scale of like spiritual maturity. Some people say spiritual intelligence. I see it as maturity, because maturity comes with that wisdom of being able to see that. I feel like the more mature we become, the more secure so we become in ourselves, right?
Yeah.
And as we do that, we no longer need to force people to we don't have to force perspective because we trust ourselves deeply and we know what's guiding us. And it's like we're holding the space for that to be true for others as well.
Right. Yeah.
So that actually transitions me into the next question, which I think is really strong. So I want to ask you, what does leadership mean for you?
It's funny that you just asked me that, because I just explained to my 5-year-old daughter, I said, oh wow, you were a leader there. And because she cleaned her room by her own, own volition, and she told my mom about it on Facebook, and now her cousin is surprising her mom by cleaning her room. And she said, what does that mean? And I said, well, you were leading by example. You didn't have to tell anybody what to do. You didn't think it was your place to tell anybody what to do, but you did something good and thoughtful, and someone else saw it and was inspired by that. And I feel that if we stand in our truth, if we are grounded and really in tune and looking inward and upward, as we discussed, that we will just be in that place that you mentioned of spiritual maturity and be leaders by example.
I think it's so true. I love the fact that you brought up that leadership. I'm trying to figure out the words to put this in, but it's leading by example and leadership without seeking validation.
Yes.
Is such a new earth approach to leadership. So you're not doing it for the kudos or because you want someone to watch. You're doing it because it's in integrity with yourself.
And you feel called to.
I love that. Goosebumps right now. Okay.
And you're not afraid to share it. You feel called and not afraid, and it doesn't matter the outcome, right?
It doesn't matter the outcome. Yep. I love that.
Yeah. Just like you felt called to set up this summit and these interviews.
I
like,
definitely.
okay, really? Okay.
I know.
And it's not, we get these ideas, which are, I feel like little nudges,
Mm-hmm.
And then you just have to be brave enough to follow it and get ego out of it, because it has nothing to do with you.
Oh, absolutely.
Again, we're a vessel or a mouthpiece.
Absolutely. I mean, honestly, if my ego had gotten involved with this, I wouldn't have attempted these interviews, because I would have assumed, my ego would have assumed I already need to know these answers. And actually what compelled me to have this conversation with everyone is the fact that I don't feel like I know the answer. And I was like, what better way to get it than to try and ask as many people as I can, how do you see it?
Yeah.
And then try to collect the data, collect the point, see what I love. One of my personal learning styles is pattern recognition. So I'm looking for patterns here, and they're already emerging. It's pretty amazing. But I love that you're saying that it's not about, when we're being led, when we stand in our, so trying to kind of go back to what you said about being in leadership, standing in your power and being called, and that it allows you to do it. It's like you can just stand in that space because you feel it, and that it's in alignment with you in the body. And I would add to that doesn't always mean you're going to feel secure around it, but there's a power there. Would you agree that there's a power there? Yes. That allows you to move through that feeling? Can you talk to that?
Well, we are spiritual beings having a human experience.
Yes.
So we're going to have human emotions. Ooh,
right. Right.
And that's just part of this experience. And it's part of learning faith and trust and being willing to, do God's will. Sometimes we have to set aside or negotiate with our human emotions whilst at the same time following this call. And
so let's talk about that point, because I find that really interesting, because we've got, at this level of our experience, when we're here on this plane having a human experience, we experience what's called paradox, right? So we experience things which seem opposingly opposite. And yet at higher levels of consciousness, these oppositions resolve. So one thing you just said here that reminds me of a paradox that's existing is being called to do God's will. So I do feel that. I do feel that no matter how you perceive the highest power, something is calling you and asking you to fulfill the mission that you came here for. And yet we have free will. That's the paradox, right? So there is the higher calling that if we allow ourselves to have faith and trust and lean into that, it's going to take us on an amazing journey. Like on a journey, you can't, like Makie was saying, you can't predict where it's going to take you, where these seeming detours are going to take you. So there's one path. And then there's human free will, which means that we've also been granted the right to choose. You are allowed to say no, and you're allowed to say yes. And it's completely up to you. So let's just talk about that and how, I mean, my intuition around you is that you've always leaned into how you're being called. So have you ever struggled against the calling? Like, tell me about your plan and then God's plan in your life and what that looked like.
Oh, well, knowing God's plan is like a daily check-in, right?
Right.
We just got to check in every day. Where do you want me to go today? Yeah, I think even as a young child and young adult, I had this inner calling. I had this, I feel like as a teenager, I had such confidence and such a strong connection to source and to my God. And then I went out into the world and I got affected. I got insecure. All of these things, right? You and I went into the entertainment industry. I mean, how?
Oh, yeah. Yes. Talk about the insecure factory, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And it's funny because the entire reason I go by Makie now is because it is the most authentic to me. Everybody called me that growing up. My real name's Mackenzie. But anybody who knew me and my family in my very small town called me Makie. And when I was in New York City, pursuing acting and whatnot, I called the bank one day and a lady answered. I don't even know who it was, but she goes, "Oh, hi, Makie. I saw you on All My Children." And, and I'm trying to do this thing the way that I think I need to do it. I thought I needed to get to a platform where I could have a voice, where I could share this inner calling. I had to go to auditions and I had to become a celebrity so someone would listen to what I had to say. And again, it was kind of tied up into a little bit about me, and I lost the purpose. Then, the pure inner calling, which is, it's really not about me at all.
Yeah.
Am I even still on topic?
Oh yeah, you're real. Just keep going. Yes, you are.
So, and then I got to a place several years ago and I was like, you know what? I don't want to pretend to be anybody else. And that's kind of, I love acting and I miss it and I would still do it today. But there was a part where I was trying to justify, I'm trying to play all these other roles, and we do that in life. We play roles, right?
Yeah.
I'm a mom, I'm a stepmom, I'm a sister, a wife. I was trying to play all these roles, but what was the purest form? And so I've just been on a journey of authenticity and finding that truth, that inner truth within me. So then therefore I can be more in tune with the truth of what God wants me to do and what I'm supposed to share and create on this planet. We're creators.
Yeah.
Right after they started the lockdown a few years ago, I launched a movement called Art Buddies Unite. And I have this strong belief that we were created, God created us. So we all have the ability to create. You and I can jive on that because we're both visual artists. And and some people don't really know that they have that power, but we are creative.
Yeah,
And that, if we exercise those creative muscles, we will be able to think for ourselves. That's how we problem solve. And I believe that then we become more open to being led by the Spirit, and being able to shift and move and do the things that we are supposed to do with our life's mission.
absolutely. You know, as you're talking, you're reminding me, as children, we never doubted we could make art. We never doubted we could sing or dance
Mhm,
or any other form of self-expression. Children don't doubt that. They just do it,
mhm.
right? It isn't until later that it goes through all these layers of, well, in order to be an artist, you have to look like your work has to be like this, or you have to meet these metrics, or in order to be, you know, a musician, you have to be able to sing like this. And, you know, it's not just that you can sing, it's like you have to sing like this. And
Yeah.
right. And it just, and same with acting, you have to look like, you know, our industry was all about how you look
Mhm,
more than even about talent in some instances. It was like, do you fit into this box that we want you to fit into?
mhm.
um and what I think is so interesting is, so you're reminding me, like, now, and I've never read the Bible, but I hear passages all the time, and there's a lot that resonates, and one of them is, you know, to, it's something along the lines like, to meet God, become like a little child again, something around that sentiment.
Mhm.
um which, as we're having this conversation, that's because it's the time period where we were most free, most unblocked, and most naturally in tune with our real essence.
Yes.
And we have to find that as adults, we actually have to undo all this societal, you know, programming that's put on us that takes us further away from that. And actually, just to kind of like go into the more esoteric parts of this, one of the names of the darker group timeline is actually the cult of personality.
Yeah.
And we're watching that play out because their whole agenda is to separate you so far from yourself that, just like in acting, you know, how we're playing a role, right? And so we separate that. The you has to step back so this other thing can come forward and express its story.
Yeah.
And there's nothing necessarily wrong with that, especially if the higher purpose is to share information with other people, right? Because we learn so much through example. So, I mean, there is a pureness to acting as an art form. So I'm not slamming that in any way. But when I go back to the whole cult of personality thing, we're watching this happen in our time, and they're really lasering in more and more. But it's like, you are your hair color, you are your gender, you are your race, you are, and they keep boxing people down and down. And the intention behind that is to separate you so far from your true essence that you're so fixated on how your personality shows up that you forget you're not your freaking personality
Yeah.
at
And you make
all.
anything of your physical self. Like, this is the box you got shipped into your human
Right.
experience.
Right.
It has
It's
nothing to do with what's inside of you. And you're so right. The more that they can pull you away from that. And, I have a teenage stepson who, these kids and the social media, and now there is the metaverse.
mm-hmm.
Do y'all know what the metaverse is?
Yeah.
And there are, what are they called?
Virtual reality
They're
or
like avatar.
AI
Yeah, I forget the name
avatars.
of them, but yeah, you want to talk about separating from your actual physical, I mean, reality, and your actual spiritual self, and you're living an alternate reality.
Oh
So
yeah.
that's going on, and then in our everyday life,
It's interesting that you bring that up, because before that ever happened, I get a lot of messages from spirit guides, higher self, through dreams. And I had a dream where basically my guides had said, I like heard my guides, we were on a walkie talkie and they were talking to me, like they were at a far away place and talking to me. And they were like, you're already separated by 1 degree. don't separate any further because we can't retrieve you if you go that far away. And I instantly, when I woke up, I knew that was talking about virtual reality. Like, don't go there, because think about it. I mean, when we're in whatever this is, right? I kind of see it as like a giant dream sort of thing. It's not as real as we perceive it to be, but we're here because it serves a purpose. It allows us to experience our true self through our choices, through seeing, like, you have the choice to tap into your power and your connection and watch what happens when you do that. And you have the choice to completely separate and cut yourself off from that and see what happens. And it's all happening, under God, the universe, source's watch. It's all happening there. So there is this, loving, benevolent entity that's observing this and purely wants to, know what are all the expressions of me, right? And so we all come and we play our part in this big play dream thing. But it is the first layer of sort of like, it's not a separation, but we're under an illusion that makes us feel separate. And so therefore we believe in a separation. And it was so interesting because my team was like, don't go any further away. You're harder to reach when you put yourself in a second layer of illusion. So interesting. And yeah, that is a real, it's really something to contend with, right? It's happening now for us to make choices around whether we choose to experience that or not. But I can't, and maybe this is me being biased, but I'm just not sure how that's going to serve us on our mission. I mean, there's always, again, I grant that there's a higher understanding, a higher perspective that I'm just not tapping into, but it doesn't feel in alignment. And I do feel concerned about people just allowing themselves to fall into another version of illusion.
Right. But this is our opportunity to choose, like you said, in this human experience, we have choice.
Yep.
And it's allowing us to choose. I'm going to be spending more time back in my hometown where I grew up on a farm, and I'm like, I'm going to plant food. Like, it's causing me and others to say, well, I'm not just going to not partake, but I'm going to take a step back and get to simpler times. I'm going to ground. I'm going to plant. I'm going to, yes, these are all physical things, but they are more base level.
Yeah. No, I totally
like disconnect from the worldly things. If you're going to plug into anything, don't charge your phone, charge yourself.
Yes.
And plug into God's network and get charged up.
I love that. I'm writing that down.
And you were talking about how as children, yes, be as a little child, and you will be able to hear more and to feel more. Again, my stepson, who is just like trying to transition from being a dependent teenager to an independent young adult, and he's like, it's so hard. I just want to be a kid again. And I'm like, I know it is. It's like, you mentioned the Bible. Okay, there's a scripture that says, take ye therefore no thought for tomorrow, for the morrow will take care of the things of itself. Like, do the birds think about what they're going to eat? Do they plant? No. Do the lilies of the field wonder how they will be clothed? No, God takes care of all of that. And so again, how do you negotiate this human experience with being a spiritual being? Because as adults, we've got bills, we've got, homes,
right,
jobs, and those are all those plates that we're spinning.
Right.
Yet it's like not what's important. We have to do it. It's part of this experience. We have to eat. We have to exist in this structure that is life at this moment.
Yeah.
But yeah, and I think people like you and I, who connect into the spiritual realm often, sometimes I even feel like then my physical experience is a little bit like, whoa, what's going on? You know? You ever get-
Yeah, well, I mean, so as a person, so what I love is, first of all, you were obviously placed somewhere where you could connect with the earth. I mean, that was part of your upbringing. It was part of how you lived your daily life. And so I feel like one of the gifts of your childhood helped you anchor into the physical world, because I often have to remind myself and other people who hang out a lot up in the spiritual that, hey, God didn't let you be just an orb of light. If you were just supposed to be up here in your spiritual safe place, you just be a little orb of light floating around, inspiring people with your light. But you were also given a body. So you have to find that, you have to find the way to bring that light down. You're not fully doing your mission if you're not reconnecting with the physical world.
I love that. Not fully doing your mission. You have to be, think about a tree. The deeper its roots go, the higher it can grow.
Oh, yes. You got some good quotes coming out of it.
Because I grew up on a farm. But I think about that a lot. And I like that you said that, because you're not fulfilling your entire mission if you're not fully present in your physical life. And none of these things are a mistake. It wasn't a mistake that I was raised on a farm. It wasn't a mistake that you were raised where you were. Our trials are not mistakes. The blessings are not mistakes. It's no matter what ideology you subscribe to, believing that all things are for your good or for your growth and your learning is the way, the truth, and the light.
I absolutely agree with you. What you're talking about here is seeing intentionality in all of creation. That's what you're talking about, and instantly reminds me of Dr. Viktor Frankl, who was a Holocaust survivor of multiple concentration camps. And he's the one that sort of developed the understanding that that giving something meaning helps you connect to it, helps you it gives you the hope, the faith, the power to move through it. If you recognize that nothing in your life is arbitrary or happening to you, but try to see how it's happening for you, it's like you can almost see what God's vision is.
Yes. And I like that you said that, because if you're tuning into what the world is playing for you right now, it is going to say, be a victim, play that story out. You'll get, more attention. You'll get things handed to you. And this is what is being shown to the younger generations. And this is not what we need to teach them.
No.
We need to teach them that life is happening for them, all of these things, and that what are we going to do with it?
Yeah. And that you make such a great point about why it's important to figure out how you can be a leader now, because I know there's a paradigm shift around what leadership is anyway. Like, I was just talking to someone earlier, and we were talking about how it was perceived in the 80s and 90s, and how that's not even relevant to the time period we're in now. So there's a reason to try and step up and understand, like, how am I contributing to what comes next? So let's talk about that. Let's talk about how you envision New Earth. So when we talk about New Earth, what is it that comes up in your mind? Deep questions, I know, but you got one.
Yeah, well, it's interesting, because I do come at this with like a Christian view, but however, we've discussed, I also have my Reiki certification, and I'm, I draw inspiration from so many different places.
Sure.
But it was neat that you and I both had this experience with people who were passing or transitioning to the spirit world, which we also discussed is like right here. It's like,
yes,
right
they're
here.
right next to us. Hey guys.
And you told me this story about a woman who was afraid to go, but she said, oh wait, there's a part 2, and we come back. So I don't know if we want to think about that part 2 as part of New Earth, and is that a part of that, or is New Earth now and what we are choosing to create and tap into? There's maybe 2 ways to think about it, but I think it's all combined. And I think what we're doing now is playing into that. Yeah.
I mean, you make a great point, because there's a lot of different ways we can see it. We can try to figure out like what's being shared through ancient text. I mean, there's definitely a lot. It's not just the Christian faith that sees a certain vision of what's going to unfold. It actually is written in many different ancient texts, and a lot of them line up with like the physical form of the event, right? They're like talking about some kind of like solar flare happening, and an adjustment of this physical plane. Other people talk about how maybe even the earth itself will split into two different earths, and certain people will be on one and other people will be on the other. When I try to ask my team, they show me that that's more of a, it does happen similar to that, except it's more frequency. And so we will still be able to interact with people on the other side, I guess. And I don't mean just those who've departed, but really those who aren't in the same frequency. I see that we will actually still have a chance to hang out, love on them, interact, but we're not going to be in the same perception at all. Like some people will see this sort of gloom and doom and how could things go this way, where others will be in a state of like rejoicing and upliftment, and they'll be like, look what we made.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But what I guess what the question I'm trying to ask is like, what is the vision you hold for it? So let's say we get past the semantics of how it happens and we go into what happens, and we're on New Earth, which it would be what I would call the higher vibration. So what vision do you hold when you think of that? We've made it past the hardest part, and we're in the New Earth now, and we're behaving or we're acting like what?
We're cooperating with one another. We're on the same page. We're connected. I feel like everything that's been happening in the last few years is there is an energy trying to disconnect us from one another, and to divide. And I see pure love and a sense of being united. And creation, like continuing to create, like it's not done, but there's like, again, the next level, like there's more to create and there's more to do.
Absolutely. And I see
abstract.
Yeah, no, that is definitely, I mean, what you're talking about is when I talk about fourth density, which is a level of consciousness higher than third density, which is where we're coming from. So when I talk about like the teachings and learnings I've studied, they're talking about how the 3D or the third density is really about this sort of, it's the one density of consciousness where we experience separation or the illusion of separation. And it's by God's design so that we can make an authentic choice, because the next level is a cooperative level. It is a more collective consciousness where I'm really holding what's best for you as if it's best for me, because it is. I see that I'm not disconnected.
Yeah.
But in order for us to purely go there, God created this level where it's the hardest level you can be at too. And it's the shortest because like, despite how horrible that sounds, there is mercy. It's like, it's a really short level, but you have to go through it to graduate to these higher frequencies. And what it looks like is that you come into this plane, you're wiped of all your past memory. You don't know who you were, what you've done before, the choices you made prior, so that you will make authentic choices. So you have no memory of what you actually are. Then you have the perception of separation. You're Makie, I'm Therese, you're over there, I'm over here. So we must be separated. So then it becomes about what's good for me. What's good for Therese? Like, I need to figure out what's in my best interest, right? But if we stay there, we start to sort of polarize. Either we don't polarize, meaning we don't find our power, or our power becomes about how I can take advantage of everything because I'm the most important thing here, right? That's a negative polarization.
Right.
And that's one of our choices that takes us on a path that's a longer journey back to source. The other choice is to recognize I'm here, you're there. But if I feel into you, if I put myself in your shoes, I start to feel you, and I start to desire for your happiness, because I can't fully feel happy if you're suffering. If I see you suffering, I can't fully connect to joy.
Right.
So I start being concerned about, are your needs taken care of? Here, you don't have enough of that, here's some of mine.
Yeah.
You know, and I really start leaning into that level of power, which is the service to others connection.
Mhm.
Right. And the more we polarize and want to, and again, God's very the perception I have is there's no judgment. Just pick a path, because until you pick the path, you keep reincarnating to this level. That's why we have this whole thing about reincarnation and about people coming back to the 3D, is because they keep forgetting to pick a path consciously and move, because it's going to move you into a direction. Your consciousness is going to open or do something if you pick one of these things. So now I'm losing track. Now I got so into it, I'm like, wait, what's the point? But yeah, so when we're talking about the next level of consciousness and we're talking about New Earth, what I've learned through my own studies is that it really, the New Earth that we're talking about, where there is cooperation and working together, is us consciously choosing to step into this place of, I know I perceive a separation, but I also, if I really let myself feel it, I feel the connection. And the more that I choose to move towards, you know, how can I help you? How can we both win here? Can I create a scenario where not only am I looking out for my best good, but I'm also starting to look out for yours. And then we start to open up that level, the higher levels of consciousness, which then become about we, right? It's a we vibration where we're starting to work together. And this is what I'm seeing is happening. And one of the reasons so many souls came here with this sense of mission, because so many of us came here to help this shift happen. The earth wants to go this way. And that's why the deeper we go into it, the more, like you talked about, going back to the farm and growing your own food. Well, that's tending to the earth. So not only is it a win for you that you're helping feed yourself, you're feeding the earth at the same time, because we're here to steward this plane, right? We're here to take care of her.
Yeah.
And it just keeps the cycle of life going if someone's tending.
Yeah.
So I see that one of the things I'm seeing about people is that there's already this shift. There's a mass leaning towards taking care of each other.
Mm-hmm.
Whether it looks like that or not on the surface, that's what's happening underneath the chaos.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
So, I mean, so what do you see as a concrete step that people can take to step into leadership to help be the stewards of this new earth?
Get quiet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What does that serve? So why would that serve someone to get quiet?
Turn off the noise of this planet and our society. Meditate. Take time with your children, take time with your inner child, take time to pray and connect, or just be open to inspiration, and you will be led each day to your next step on what your part in this entire collective of the shift is.
I love that. I mean, I try to practice, and sometimes, I mean, nobody's perfect, right? Sometimes we get caught up in our own drama that we forget we have a 24-hour, 7 days a week helpline like sitting there waiting for us.
Yes.
But I find, and I notice that there's two, so going back to the idea of paradox, one of the things I see happen is that, and maybe it's very willful people, but it's like we're so afraid to trust God, source, the higher plan, whatever you want to call it. Like we're afraid that if we let go of our will or our control, that we'll be led to something that'll be like meh, or like So let's talk to that, because you actually have been led quite a bit to things that maybe weren't on the original plan.
Right. Yeah, it goes along with that same theme of detours, right?
Yeah.
What you thought, well, I was going over here, but how did and like sometimes our lives need to like metaphorically blow up so that the shifts can or the pieces can land differently, or there's space for it to be filled with what we're supposed to be learning and what we're supposed to be doing. And sometimes in the middle, hey, you did a video maybe a year or so ago, I think you called it the messy middle.
Yeah.
And you related it to a painting in process, right?
Yeah.
I'm working on another song for a film right now, and my husband listened to it and he's like, well, I don't think it's quite there. I'm like, it's not. Those are the rough vocals, and these are the temp instruments, and we're gonna, record live instruments and blah, 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 right? So this is like, it's messy in the middle. There's it's a process where, to build a temple, you build it brick by brick, and that's what our lives are. That's what our purpose is. And sometimes it's foggy and we can't really see the end, but that's where trust and faith comes in. And you just have to believe that it's going to be so much better than you ever thought it would be.
Yeah.
And it's hard because we just want to hold where we're comfortable and safe.
Oh yeah.
I'm afraid, change.
I know. No, I totally feel that. So I guess my follow-up question is, so from the House of Truth herself, do you regret any of the detours that you've been sent on?
No, I don't.
I thought so.
I don't. It's funny. So I went to New York City to be an actress, to, do musical theater and film and TV. And I ended up to support myself, to feed myself. We have these day jobs, right? And I taught myself graphic design, but I ended up designing for CoverGirl and Max Factor and the New York Comedy Festival and the Wall Street Journal. And the entire time I was doing that, I was like, I'm not on, I'm not living my purpose. Come full circle, I don't even know if I should share this, but like I've been now pitched to be, the host of a design show, which is like, oh, I was trying to act to be, to have a platform or whatever, but I took this huge, massive detour being a designer. And that entire time I was like, I'm not living my purpose, blah, 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 I'm just making money. But then it comes full circle and you're like, oh, I didn't see that coming,
Right.
Oh, thanks, and for me personally, that it feels better to have a platform where I can speak my truth and not necessarily lines that someone else wrote for me, or a part that doesn't necessarily represent who I need to be and who I need to stand rooted in as fulfilling my purpose here.
I mean, you make your story is such a great example of what it looks like to surrender, which is something that's it's a power. In fact, I just talked about that in my karma cards, that it's the secret sauce to manifesting is to surrender. So manifesting definitely appeals to people who have strong sense of will. I have a strong sense of will. So I'm like, I know what I want, God, like this is what I want.
Yeah.
And yet there is a power in surrender that is greater than your will, because you're leaning into a bigger purpose, a bigger plan.
Yes.
And just like Makie illustrated for us beautifully, that she trusted God, she trusted source, right? So she's like, meanwhile, she's like, this is what I intended to do. And yet she still went there because it served a purpose. It was supporting her, but it was like God's in the background, like, just wait a minute, just wait for it.
Or wait 10 years, like it's not a minute sometimes, you guys.
Right. I mean,
and I think that's also why I launched this lifestyle brand, Late Bloomer Crew. Obviously, it's a play on my married name, last name Bloomer, but I
So
do
good.
believe it is never too late. And the world wants to tell us that if you didn't rise to stardom in your late teens and 20s, like we do these days, we're like, "Ah," you know, um,
Right.
it's like this peak early adult late thing, which is weird because shouldn't we learn to find that spiritual maturity, and then we're like, oh, now I'm ready to bloom,
Right.
um now I'm grounded, now I know who I am, or I know my God, I know my source, I know, like, my I can communicate with my higher source more and my pure inner child. Now it's time to bloom. It's like, you guys, I just turned 40 this year. I mean, and it feels so good, and
Yeah.
it's just a number, and life can be long. Our days, there is a planned time when we each shall leave this physical existence.
Hmm.
And so live life to the fullest and stop being so damn afraid.
Absolutely. And you remind me, and your last name reminds me, I mean, a flower knows when to bloom and you can't rush it. It's like I was saying to someone, you can't go up to a rose in May and yell at it, bloom.
Yeah,
It's not ready. It's not ready. But when it
right.
is ready, it's magnificent.
Oh, that's
It's
so beautifully put. Yeah.
yeah, it's absolutely magnificent.
I
So,
oh, sorry, I released a song last year called Bloom Wild, which also ties into everything. And my daughter sings on it. But in the
oh,
bridge, everyone go listen to it. In the bridge, it says, "You're not a weed, you're a wildflower with the power to begin. So scatter your seeds, let a wildfire burn them up to catch the wind." Because when a wildfire happens, and living in California, we have these things, right? Even I think
yeah.
where it happens,
Hmm.
and it seems so devastating. But there are certain seeds that, when under that pressure, they actually burst open to create new life.
Yeah.
And if we can be those seeds that burst open under pressure, and life is hard, there's a lot of pressure, but if we can burst open and like bloom into what God has intended us to be, we're gonna be fine.
I, it's so beautiful. And it's one of the interesting things to note, and I think it even says it may say it in the Bible, but it definitely says it in other spiritual texts that um, this new earth actually comes through fire. Now, I know, and it might not necessarily be literal fire. Some people
Right.
see it as literal fire, but the
I think
element
it's
of
already
fire,
on fire.
I know, the element of
It feels
fire
like it.
is connected to the heart, and fourth density is connected to the fourth chakra, which is the heart. And that's where we're going, is this open heart. So it's like, that's why you see like the images of like Jesus with the flaming heart,
Mhm.
right? Because the element of fire is actually connected to the heart, and it's through the fire. And as a coach and working with people, in order to be on the other side of anything, you have to walk through the fire.
Mhm.
It's the only way out is through. But the fire is a transmutation. Fire is the element of transmutation. So when you walk through a spiritual fire, if you will, you're burning off anything false,
Oh, I love it.
and only the truth comes forward.
Yeah. I mean, think of a blacksmith. They have to put the metal into the fire to be able to mold it into what it is supposed to be. So we kind of have to go through this refiner's fire in our life to
Yeah. God,
become.
that is such a good point. I mean, I love how this is all like leading up to this, because it's all, I mean, if we move into full trust, everything that's happening is by design and it's for our highest good. And
Mhm.
all we have to do is, like you said, be led by faith, trust this process, and know, like, give it meaning, know that something that is truly loving and benevolent is taking care of you. It's got you. It heard the prayer. It
Yeah.
heard what you wanted, and it's bringing forward, it's going to bring you this or better.
Yes.
And you might not always see how that works.
Yes.
So I love that. I feel like all of that does tie into leadership, because to lead, to be out in front means something. There's nothing to follow except faith,
Mhm.
except what's calling you forward.
Yes. And sometimes it's uncomfortable to step up and to
Oh
be
yeah.
present.
Oh yeah. That's the first fire you have to go through, is
Yeah.
that fire of like, this is terrifying and I'm going to do it anyway,
Yeah.
because there's no other direction I'd rather go. It's like this, or follow the program, and some of us were just born with an instinct to buck that program. Like I think everybody I'm talking to bucked the program. We just couldn't believe it,
Yeah.
because we never lost the connection to whatever is bigger. I mean, I feel very lucky that's been my life path. It hasn't been easy, because you're always kind of seen as the outsider troublemaker.
Yeah. Yeah.
And yet it's one of the greatest protections, I think, that's been afforded. Right. And I do feel like people who step into their leadership, you get that protection, right? You get that protection from your highest power. As soon as you lean into that, there is this beautiful benevolent force that's like, I got you now.
Yeah.
We're going to go somewhere. You don't get to fully know what this means yet, but it'll make
Right.
sense when you look back on it.
Exactly. 100%.
So I would love for people to hear your songs, especially your new one, Detours. And the other song that you mentioned, what was it, Wildfire or Wildflowers?
Wild. Yep,
Born.
that's already out, and Detours we're just finishing up. So,
Okay.
but if you
And where
sign up, sign up for my newsletter, and then you'll be in the know when that gets released. You can go to MakieBloomer.com, and there's links to all the things: Spotify, Instagram, Late Bloomer Crew. You can grab a t-shirt to remind yourself to bloom wild.
Yes, and there's a link right here that you guys can click that will take you and get you 10% off of Late Bloomer Crew products, and keep you in touch with Makie so that you can see everything that she's working on. Because as you can tell, she's got quite a few things that are on the verge of like being seen. So I'm excited to watch and see where your journey goes next.
Thank you. And I'm always watching you too. So let's all just unite and support each other. It's such a beautiful thing. And the more we do that, the farther we can go.
Absolutely. That is such a great note to end on. Thank you, Makie, so much for being here with us today. And to all of you who are watching, I will see you in the next episode of New Earth Leadership Summit. Until then, stay magical.